We're going to start with our guest speaker. We had several speakers who were supposed to be here. Roy Jesse called yesterday. He was sick. He can't come. Steve Bryant is going to join us in a few minutes on Zoom because he got sick and couldn't be here in person. And Scott and Neil were supposed to be here, and their work wouldn't let them have the time off they needed to be here. So we've got Bobby Adams. Bobby was part of that original group. He was there the first day. And Bobby spoke for us in our 50th anniversary. I went back and watched that Friday night just to remember a lot of those things. And that picture you gave me, I've lost it somewhere. I can't find it. It's here. It's here. I just got to find it. So, but anyway, we're glad to have Bobby with us, and I'm going to let him speak now.
Believe it or not, I've heard that tune before. First, let me thank the Lynchburg Church of Christ for inviting me again to help you celebrate your 60th anniversary. I'll wait for the mic.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's try again. Maybe you can hear me a little better. I want to thank the church and Ray for asking me to come back and share in your celebration for your 60th anniversary. As Ray said, I was here for the 50th. Had an opportunity to share some things there, but by no means did I share everything that could have been shared. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to come back and speak again. So when Ray told me he wanted me to talk about the decade of the 60s and then the other decades would be carried out later, I couldn't help but think of some of the differences between the 60s and now and the times we're living in now and some of the similarities. The first thing that came to my mind is a picture that I have that I wanted to get to Larry Joe. Speaking of not getting pictures, I wasn't able to do that, so I'm going to try to describe it to you. Now, it's said that a picture's worth 1,000 words. I will try not to take 1,000 words to give you this description. But it's a picture in the mountains, and there's a stream flowing, and standing next to the stream is a young man. I happen to know a lot about this young man. He was 5 foot 6 inches tall. He was wearing blue bottom jeans, bell bottom blue jeans. Weighed about 125 pounds. And the picture has a picture of him sort of standing from behind, right? And so you can see the back of this individual, and you can see the hair. And the hair was parted in the middle, right? And it came down the side like this and all the way down to the shoulders. And I thought, well, that would be a good picture to start out with to show the difference between what's happened to some of our fashions from the 60s to now. The reason I know who that man, or know so much about that young man, is because that young man was me. And I have something to say about how my fashion has changed, and that is the Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. But thinking about the 60s, I do want to mention something that is similar, I think, between the 60s and today, unfortunately, I would say. And that is, in the 60s, we were a very, 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 very divided country, just like we are today. Then we were divided over the Vietnam War. We were divided over shouldn't have been, but we were divided over the civil rights movement. We were divided over how to manage the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And it seems to me that when divisions like that occur in our country, there are opportunities that are taken by Satan to try to marginalize the Christian community and Christians and make us feel as if somehow the traditions that we or what we know about our faith is not right, or that we should be ashamed of it. I think about the 60s. There was also what was referred to as a music revolution in the 60s. And I want to share you just a couple of verses of a couple of songs that were put out by then by two of the most famous groups of that period of time. And the reason I want to share these with you is because, as I mentioned to you, there was an attempt to marginalize the Christian community, and one way in which they were attempting to do this was to work on the young people at the time, because this new music, was very influential, particularly to teenagers, young and old teenagers, and folks in the early 20s. So the first song I want to share with you, now just not the whole song, just a few lyrics, and this is from memory, so don't hold me to every single word. But it's a song written by the Rolling Stones called Sympathy for the Devil, and the title says it all. And the words go something like this. I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain, made sure that Pilate washed his hands and sealed his fate. Have some sympathy and respect, or I'll lay your soul to waste. I was there when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies stank. Have some sympathy for me and respect for me, or I'll lay your soul to waste. I was there when Anastasia screamed in vain. Have some sympathy for me. That's the kind of language that was being fed to those of us who were teenagers in the 60s. Let me give you one more example. And by the way, the two songs that I chose here, again, were songs selected because of the groups that wrote them. They were probably the two most popular groups in the 60s. The first one I gave you was the Rolling Stones. If you weren't familiar with that song, I bet you're familiar with this one. This one was written by the lead singer for the Beatles. And I imagine you've heard it. It's called Imagine. And I'm just going to give you one line from this song. Imagine there's no heaven and no hell below and no religion too. That was a beautiful song. Beautiful tune, well sung. But after this line is made, the artist goes on and talks about how there could be a utopia on earth, a wonderful place, if we could just get religion out of the way. That's the kind of things, that's the kind of language that was being fed to young people at that time. Now, these songs were catchy tunes. They're very popular with my generation. And yet, many of my generation, including some of you in this room, managed to survive the attempt to water down our faith by a culture that was, if not hostile to, it certainly was not friendly to the Christian way of life. I would say similar things are happening in our culture today. We have great divisions in our country. And there are folks that are trying to take that, use that as an opportunity to make us question our faith. They're trying to tell us that men are not men, women are not women. And there are not two genders, but 50 genders. And if we don't believe that, why, we're closed-minded, right? And we're not being fair to people. So I'm going to raise a question to us today. How does a Christian survive a culture like this? How did we survive in the 60s and come out and still be Christians? How do young people survive today? How do Christians survive today under these circumstances? How did the Lynchburg Church of Christ survive for 60 years to be a steadfast bulwark of faith for this community? I would suggest to you that we all survived, this church survived, because we had a great foundation upon which to stand. I would also suggest to you that for the Lynchburg Church of Christ, that foundation was built in the decade of the 1960s. The church began officially in 1963. Some might say the church actually started in 1962, when a small, shy, unassuming family moved to Lynchburg. And the family I'm referring to are the Kleins: David, Elsie, and Larry Joe. They came into town. David wanted a church here. And so they started meeting in 1962 on Wednesday nights, just a prayer meeting, right? They had a lesson and a prayer. And it wasn't too long after that David realized that he really wanted a church here and really needed a church here. And ever present with his energy for the church, with his gifts, he would always give his gifts to the church, both monetary and otherwise. David went out to seek a minister. And there was a minister that was preaching not too far from here by the name of Eddie Forehand. And I don't know if you are familiar with Eddie Forehand's work, but he was known for starting new churches, right? And it took some effort, but David did talk Eddie Forehand into coming, and so then they started meeting. They had a pastor, they had a minister who could speak, they had a pastor, and so they could have sermons, right? They could have baptisms, they could have communion, they could have a full worship service. They started meeting in the Pittman Plaza, in a little office building. I spoke about this 10 years ago a little bit. In that little building, we had one room, one small sanctuary room where we were able to worship. There were a couple other, I think one other room where we had classrooms. Larry Joe can give you more information. By the way, let me stop here for a moment and thank Larry Joe, because much of the information I'm giving you today, I got from him. His memory's much better than mine. But, and we had a classroom in a hallway there in the office building. And there again was David. There was David, again, putting to use his talent, his time, and his treasure for the Lynchburg Church of Christ, laying that foundation that was so important for this little church. He built a sign. Okay, it was a portable sign, so you could stand the sign up like this so that people would know there's a Church of Christ in this community, so that visitors would know this is the location of the Church of Christ. But not only did he build the sign, he also, because he was so busy on Sunday he didn't have to put it up, he made sure that the sign was placed before service started and taken up in Sunday evening when the service was over. And he did that by paying a Pittman Plaza attendant $10 a week just to put the sign up and take it down. Now, for those of you that are as old as I am, or as old as my mother, you'll realize that $10 in 1963 actually had some value. I mean, depending on the month, that was $40 or $50 a month. You could buy some groceries with $40 or $50 in 1963. So that was a real gift that David gave to the church. Well, not too many years after the church had been meeting there at Pittman Plaza, they decided it was time that they needed a home, a place that they could call their own, a building with a foundation of its own. So they started working on the building that we're sitting in right now. And once again, who was there to build that building? Well, among others, David Klein. David and Ralph Hines. Ralph Hines was a master bricklayer, and the two of them laid all the brick that you see for the outer part of this building. David also did the interior finishing work for this building. They were helped by other folks. Ed Wall. Ed Wall did the framing of the building. The Adams brothers did the plumbing and the duct work for the building. But this small group of believers put together a foundation here that the church that would house the Lynchburg Church now for 60 years. Now, more importantly, though, than the foundation of this building is the real foundation that built this church. You see, this small group of believers had a foundation upon which they could build that would sustain them and would sustain this congregation for many years to come. And that foundation was not a belief in their own personal ability and what they could do, nor was it a foundation built on the belief that what they could do as a collective group of Christians. That wasn't it either. Nor was it this foundation, obviously, not the foundation of the church. It's not the building, we all know that. But rather the foundation upon which this church was built in the 1960s, we can find in Matthew 16, a very famous passage there, where Peter is talking to Jesus and he's sharing with Jesus what people are saying about him. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Peter, ever the apostle who was eager to speak out, I can imagine him saying it like this: "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then I can imagine Jesus very calmly looking back at Peter and staring at him straight in his face, looking in his eyes, and saying with a very clear voice, "And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now, I believe you're going to hear a few things in just a moment about from other speakers about subsequent decades of this church and how this congregation, built upon this very solid foundation laid down by Christ, passed on to Peter, and then passed on almost 2,000 years later to the small community that built this church in the 1960s. I believe what you're going to hear are some wonderful stories, wonderful success stories about God's kingdom here in Lynchburg. As you hear, I think, probably a little bit about Clyde Dalton and Ray Ure, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Ray, you would be the longest practicing minister for the Lynchburg Church of Christ in its entire history. Thank you, and with that, I'll leave it to whoever's next.
Okay, do we have Steve?
Yes.
Okay, hello, Steve. Can you hear me? You may have to talk to him back there, Nathaniel. Tell him he can start.
You're, wait, oh, sorry. Had to be on mute. Try again.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes. You're good.
All right, just tell me when to begin.
All right,
You
go
can
ahead.
start.
Okay. Good morning, all. Welcome from Georgia. I wish I could be with you this morning, but we bring you happy anniversary and happy Palm Sunday to all of you. I'd wish to be with you in person this morning, but this week I came under the weather with a head cold and pink eye and some other weird springtime colds with the pollens and all, but I apologize. I did not want to share that with you, even though I love you. Did not want to bring that to each of you there. A few weeks ago, Ray had given me a call and asked me to think about coming up and sharing with you guys some words about what the church means to me in the Lynchburg Church of Christ. How it has influenced my life and the direction that it has given me in my life and in my family's life. So I pondered over that in a few days, and I penciled in a few words, and bear with me, I'm old. I cannot speak without writing things anymore. So let me try to jot down a few words here with you and let you know what came across my mind. First of all, Lynchburg Church of Christ means everything in the world to me. It's exactly the place that the Lord wanted me to be in my early age. It's where I met Jesus for the first time, and it has been an influence in my life with my Christian walk since 1968. So let me take you a little bit of a history lesson back for those who do not know the history, but kind of how we came to come to Lynchburg Church of Christ. Those that remember, there used to be a grocery store with Kmart. Kmart grocery store was over on Wards Road, and my dad was a meat cutter there, and he worked with Clyde Dalton's wife, Madeline. For those that remember her. She invited my dad to come to church, in which he accepted, I think after a few weeks of reluctancy there. You got to remember, my dad was a drill sergeant with the Marine Corps, so he was a little stubborn in his way, a little stubborn in certain ways, but he finally gave in to her invitation, and the rest is history. From that point on, we attended Lynchburg Church of Christ for many years until eventually, as most of you know, my dad accepted the calling to be a minister himself and attended Roanoke Bible College in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. It was many years later that we moved to Elizabeth City, but before then, while he was in college, we continued to go. My mom continued to bring us to church, and we continued to attend Sunday school, and I attended Doug and Roxy Dameron's, if you guys remember them, their Sunday school class, and I grew closer and closer, to knowing more about Christ. And eventually, I visited Camp Pitt on many years, went there, and I eventually came back and was baptized by Clyde Dalton there at the church. So it's where I started my walk with Christ. As a teenager, I continued to go to Camp Pitt, continued to come to church there, and attended Ann Ross's Sunday school class. I'm not sure if Ann is still with you guys there or not, but if so, thank you, Ann, for your influence and your guidance to me along the way. So as time went on and college time came, I decided to go to Ferrum College, and I chose that as my destination. And it was pretty ironic that my dad was preaching in the area. He was preaching at County Line. He was filling in as minister during that time. And I also found my future wife at college, Donna, as you guys know. Dad had us to come several weekends to come by and have dinner, lunch with him, and visit with the church and attend services. And eventually Donna accepted for Christ, and I think that was one of my dad's greatest joys, that he was able to baptize Donna into Christ as well. And then eventually, even greater, he was able to baptize both of his granddaughters, Jessica and Brianna, there at the church as well. So Dad was really enthused with what he was able to do with his ministry. But returning home after college with a wife, boy, were we young and green and wet behind the ears. And the influence that you, my church family, stood behind us and gave us love, gave us support, gave us instruction, was nothing more than the love that Christ wanted you to show. And it was a great guidance that really you gave to us that helped us grow and walk with Christ. Ray had twisted Donna and my arm several times to be counselors to go to Camp Pitt. Remember Camp Pitt, it's going to be a full circle here in a minute. It was definitely a stepping stone in our life and an influence for some things that we did later on in our life as well. But we also, I became a deacon. We worked closely closely with the men's group. And Donna worked closely with the women's group. But I can't thank my church family enough, starting with my parents, Ray and Carla, Franklin and Faye, the Rose family, Miss Arinda, Doug and Roxy, Ann Ross, and I know there are many, many other people that I just can't remember. Sorry, the age has stepped in. But the one that, without a shadow of a doubt, and we all grew so much wisdom with Elva Kersey. I think that she probably was the greatest influence of all of us in our walk there at church. And, without having Elva in our life, who knows where we would be. But the Lord has blessed us, with two great children, Jessica and Brianna. They continue to serve, in their Christian walk. As they are teenagers, when we moved back from Kansas to Georgia, we attended Lilburn Christian Church, and a few years after we were there, we branched off to another church, Hamilton Mill Christian Church, and just so happens the youth minister that was assigned to Hamilton Mill was Weldon Davis. Now, I'm not sure if many of you know Weldon. Weldon was from, I think it was Sheba Christian Church, but Weldon was a camper when Donna and I were counselors for Ray at Camp Pitt. So it really became full circle for our girls to be able to be associated with someone from Camp Pitt, and then they eventually did a mission trip coming up to Camp Pitt and working there. So it was complete full circle for the camp and what it did in our life, and then what it eventually did in our girls' life. The girls now both have husbands. They both have children. We have a total of 3 grandchildren. We're fully blessed from the Lord with that. If we could have figured out how to have the grandchildren first, we certainly would have done that. I think many of you can say that as well. But we certainly love our grandchildren and what they mean to us. And we're so thankful that they're in church with us here in Georgia and growing up with the Lord as well. So with all that said, we love you without a shadow of a doubt. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for the love, the guidance, the support, the prayers that you have given me and my family in our journey from Lynchburg to Kansas to Lilburn and now in northern Georgia. I wish to offer you a happy anniversary for your 60th, and I know you'll be there for another 60 more. We hope to see you soon. As soon as the weather breaks and the colds get out of the way, we'll see if we can't make our way up to Lynchburg and be able to meet with you pretty soon. Anyway, thank you, and I love you, and hope to see you soon.
Okay, thank you, Steve, if you can hear me. Great job, and appreciate both you guys, because just those two guys have covered a tremendous part of the past of this church. You're talking about David. Steve's talking about Bobby. Those were 2 of the elders that were elders when I came here. The third one was Jesse Owens. Without those 3 guys, I wouldn't be standing here today, because they taught me so much. And I think about them often, how I missed them and their guidance. Because next to my father, I looked at those 3 guys like fathers too. And they took me as green as I was. And I hope they made me a great preacher. I don't know that I'm all that great, but they made me what I am. Because one thing about them, and I'm afraid a lot of young preachers don't have that what I had. They would let me plan things and do things, and they'd let me fail. And then they would say, it wasn't a bad idea, but maybe we should twist it just a little bit and do this. And then it would work. Nowadays, I don't think young guys have that. I think that's why we have such a shortage of ministers, is because people condemn the things that went wrong rather than try to help develop the young guy. So I just am so thankful for those three. Hold on just a minute, please. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, quickly.
How's it supposed to be?
It's supposed to be 120 pieces. No. All right. Bye. Okay. Sorry about that, but we want food for lunch, don't we? And I figured that's what she was calling about. Anyway, it's time to think about the real reason we're here, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we're going to have our time of communion. And I had announced earlier, but just in case you didn't hear, if you didn't get yours already, it's right there by the sound booth. You can pick it up there for that. In preparation for the Lord's Supper, we are going to sing "Oh, the Blood." Okay. This time, Brian's going to come and share a little bit with us.
So let me give you a little bit of background on how today was kind of thought out. We were sitting in the board meeting, we were talking about, hey, what are we going to do for this anniversary? And so I would say, besides Larry, my siblings and I have probably spent the largest percentage of our lives at this congregation than anybody else. And so I have lots of memories and things that have happened here, and people that have influenced my life, and people that we've seen come and go, and we think about, all of those different times, and so we got to talking about it, and we said, let's see how many people we can get to come back and share some of their stories and share some of their memories with us. So some of my memories and some of my stories are crazy. I remember when the building was just that tiny piece over there. I remember the addition getting added on to the back of it. I remember this addition. Going back to that one, I remember when we were doing that addition getting choked on a lifesaver, and the ambulance having to be called, and somebody holding me over where the ramp was put, beating on my back trying to get me to breathe. I remember crawling under the pews with Eric McCroskey, and for those of you that don't remember Eric necessarily, you might remember Alan McCroskey, who was a big part of the congregation here. And so I remember the wooden walls. I remember the basement down there, taking the panels out so we could have our fellowship meals, because we didn't have a big fellowship hall. I remember one time. I remember one time Dad resigning, and I remember people coming to us, and I got to thinking about this story, Elaine, when I saw you this morning, actually. And I remember Elaine and April coming to the house, coming to talk to Dad, and taking me and my sisters out to McDonald's. So people could talk with Mom and Dad a little bit while we were going around and doing things. Fast forward a few years, and I remember being a teenager and getting ready to go to college. And I remember telling my mom, she sat up and cried, and hey, I will come back. Now, in my head, I was coming back for a visit. I wasn't planning to come back to be back forever. But as Natalie and I dated and we got married and we got to talking, I said, Lynchburg's not a bad place to raise kids. If we're going to get married and we're going to have kids one day, even though people doubted that we were going to do that, have kids anyway, we decided that this was a good place to be. And then we were talking the other day, and so we just had the 20th anniversary of our college graduation. So I've been back here for 20 years, minus the 5 years that I was gone for college, and I did say 5, and that was for a bachelor's degree because I decided to do the extended plan and stay a little bit longer. So I've been back for 20 years, and I've seen faces come and I've seen faces go. But we got to talking about how many people, thinking about how many people that this congregation has influenced and sent out to work in other places and to let others know about what Jesus has done for them. And this congregation has helped mold and helped to shape that for so many people. As we got to trying to contact people and thinking about people to come and speak, there are people from this congregation in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Washington State, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and I'm sure there are a bunch of other states that I'm leaving out, but those are just some of the places that I can think of. And so when I went away to college, I went to RBC for a year, and then I transferred out to Johnson. And at Johnson, one of my professors would talk a lot of times about prophecies that had multiple meanings to them. And so I want to read a prophecy. I want to read from Jeremiah, starting chapter 29, verse 11. And the people, the Israelites, have been taken off to Babylon, and they're in captivity. And this is what it said. It says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." This prophecy is talking about the people of Israelite being brought back to Jerusalem. But it's also talking about a bigger thing, and I think as a congregation we have experienced this. It's talking about God's people being brought back to Him. And while we have influenced many people here at this congregation, and while many people here have come to meet Jesus and understand what great things and what hope He has for their life, have gone out to other places and are sharing that with other people, there's also a hope in heaven that one day we will all, regardless of where we spread across this world, be brought back and have an amazing homecoming where we'll see everybody, the ones that have moved away and the ones that have passed on, be able to come back and celebrate and worship Jesus all together. And so, as we are here today celebrating the anniversary of this local congregation, what I wanted to share with you today is that even though there are a number of people that didn't get to participate with us today, there is a hope in in a future that we will be able to share with each other and celebrate in heaven. Thank you.
So, I know we have several people that signed the charter back on April the 7th, 1963. I'd like for those folks to come down front real quick, if possible. All right, so while they're coming, there were 21 that signed the charter that day. All right. Several of those we know have gone on to meet the Lord. Some of them I don't know anything about. They moved away long before I ever came, and don't know how to get in touch with them. But today we've got Larry, we got Harold and Francis, and Lottie. Were all part of that, signing that charter. Now, not only did they help sign the charter, Pam was there, right? Bobby, you can come up and join them. He was there. Is there anybody else here that was there that day in April 7th, 1963? All right. Now, y'all don't go anywhere because I'm going to take your picture. Maybe y'all need to come a little closer together, if possible. Now that's good. Oh, that's good. That's good right there. All right, thank you. Let's give them a big hand.
Ray, one story Brian left out was that him and Natalie broke down out in Western Virginia, and he told Natalie, we're going to the movie, Mom and Dad will take care of this when we come out. And there was a preacher from a church out there, and then it ended up, long story short, Harold and Francis took his car to him out of Johnson once it got fixed at the little church, because they knew that the preacher and his wife had lied on college with his wife. So anyway, that was another story.
Yeah.
Connection back.
All right, thank you all very much. You can have a seat. And what Carl's talking about, there are so many stories that we could tell today that we just don't have time to go back in all the stories. But very much like what she said, I wasn't here on April 7th, 1963. But every one of these people that were standing up front here have had an important influence in my life in one way or another. And if it wasn't for their vision, none of us would be here today. So we owe them a great debt, and we're very appreciative to them. And I was thinking about, for my part, what in the world would I have to say after everybody else has already told all the stories? But we were down at MacU, still Roanoke Bible College to me. For all of us that went to school there when it was Roanoke, it will stay Roanoke. And Bobby's smiling, and Bobby's on staff at MacU now. He teaches chemistry at MacU. So it's kind of interesting. You know, we're talking about going full circles. Steve was talking full circles with Camp Pitt. You got full circles with Roanoke Bible College. Isn't it interesting how God's kingdom works? And that we all have connections somehow because of those kind of things. But so we were down there. Dr. Johnny Presley was talking about, because it was the 75th anniversary of Roanoke Bible College in McHugh. And he told a story that was very familiar. In your Bibles, it's in 1 Kings 18. It's Elijah and the contest at Mount Carmel. And he told some things that would apply at the college, but I got to thinking about this passage and how would it apply at Lynchburg. You all know the story. Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest on Mount Carmel. He allowed them to go first. Whoever could call fire down out of heaven to consume their sacrifice, that would be the one whose God was real. So he let the prophets of Baal go first. In fact, he let them go all day. At lunchtime, he really started to taunt them and mock them and make fun of them. Because here they were cutting themselves and crying out, and nothing is happening because Baal wasn't a real God. And then when he'd had enough, Elijah said, well, now that's enough. Come over here and let me show you what's going to happen. So starting at verse 30 in chapter 18, it says this, Then Elijah said to all the people, Come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Now you're thinking about that. It is our job to get the people's attention. Come near and let's talk about the Lord. Our society needs that more than ever. I mean, Bobby mentioned all the cultural changes. And today, in the 60s, there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of problems in this world. We need to get the world's attention and say, come here. I've got something important to share with you. But then notice he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. This church has its roots in the Restoration movement. A movement that was started back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, to simply be Christians and Christians only. To follow the Bible and the Bible only. Elijah repaired that altar. We're trying to get back to make sure we're the church that the New Testament describes. We want to do things the Lord's way, not our way. Now, of course, over time, methods change. You know, we've sang some songs that might be a little bit different this morning than what was sung in 1963. You know, probably we sang some songs this morning that were different than we sang at the 50th anniversary. But sometimes the newer songs have a lot more meaning of Scripture than some of the old songs. So sometimes methods change, but the message never changes. And so Elijah said, come down here. He rebuilt that altar. All right? He made the sacrifice. He told them to drench it with water. 3 times they poured water on, filled the trench around the altar. And then verse 36 says, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. It was time for the evening prayer. Remember, Jews prayed at 9 and 12 and 3. It was time for that 3 o'clock prayer. Elijah knew the time of worship. We need to remember what the Lord's Day is all about. We're here today to celebrate 60 years, but more important, we're here today because it's the Lord's Day. And we're here to honor him because he's blessed us with these 60 years. And he'll bless us with the next 60 if we remain faithful and true to him. If we don't forget when it's time to worship, time to come into the Lord's house. The writer of Hebrews says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. We've got to remember that time to worship. But at the time of the evening sacrifice, this is what he prayed. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and I have done these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God and that you have turned their hearts back again. And then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the offering. Elijah was a man of prayer. I've often wondered, because Elijah, remember, had this thing 3 years earlier. He had walked up to Ahab and said, it's not going to rain till I say so. I often wonder, where did he get that idea? Because the Bible doesn't really tell us. Was it because him and the Lord had a conversation about it? Was it his idea? Was it the Lord's idea? But I don't know. But I believe that in his prayer, they had some conversation about it. And Elijah had enough faith that he could walk up to Ahab and say, it's not going to rain till I say so. And now he had enough faith that when he prayed, that God would send fire down out of heaven and consume that sacrifice, and that the rain would come. Do we have that kind of faith? I mean, that's the kind of faith that built this church. That's the kind of faith that's kept this church alive. That's the kind of faith that will take us to the future. And then we'll have that great homecoming with the Lord one day with that kind of faith. All right, we have a little video that I want to show you, just kind of reminiscing the past 60 years. So we'll do that at this time.